Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Karen Bischoff. I am the founder and president of the COVID-19 Long Hauler Advocacy Project, long hauler since March 2020. Today, we are going to be going over some media training, which is something we've been getting a lot of requests from the community, especially with our recent open letter project and working on all of the things surrounding that. Today with us, we have Mia Jacobs, who is the sister of one of our members, Becca Jacobs. And she's going to be going over some really great tips and advice with us today. We're going to do about 40 minutes of going over strategies and 20 minutes for a Q&A. So I'm going to hand it over to Mia, and she's going to go through some of the housekeeping with you, and we'll go from there. So thank you for everybody who jumped on here today. We are so grateful to have you and grateful to have your voice as part of this movement.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everyone, for having me. As Karen said, my name is Mia Jacobs, and I am a communications and media professional. I'm also the sister of Becca, who is a long hauler in this group. And so I'm really excited to be with you all today. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Okay. And then we are going to get started as soon as I find the button to present. Okay. Wonderful. So thank you, Karen, for having me, and thank you, everyone, for being here today. I want to start with a quick disclaimer, since we are recording this, and just so you all know. So I am, as I mentioned, a communications and media professional, but this presentation, I'm here as a volunteer. This is not in my professional capacity. None of the advice or recommendations I'm giving you today are coming in my capacity, in my professional capacity, or through my affiliation with any of my professional networks. So just need to say that before we get started. So the next thing, I just wanted to start with a few housekeeping things, and I'm gonna just minimize this here so I can see us. We, as Karen mentioned, we are going to be taking about 30 to 40 minutes of presentation followed by Q&A. We are going to have Q&A at the end. So I just wanna be clear that for the chat, I'm not going to be keeping an eye on the chat. I know Karen is going to be in there, but we are going to take questions at the end. If you do want to ask a question, please type your question into the chat. We'll keep track of them, and then we'll get to them at the end. And please keep your question as concise and related to the presentation as possible so that we can get to as many as possible. But of course, I just have to say we may not get to everyone, but we'll get to as many as we can. As you should have gotten a notification when you joined, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording along with the slides is going to be sent out afterwards. So what we'll cover, and I actually just want to start by taking a step back and talking about what we are going to cover, what we're not going to cover. So I know that there's a lot of, I saw your responses in the registration form, and I know that there's a lot that folks are looking for, and I just want to be really clear. So this session is about understanding strategic communication and how to use messaging to work in that space, how to talk about storytelling, and how to understand, how to move from talking about your experience as a long hauler and using it in a space. This is part one. Part two is going to be a more tactical media focused training. So part two is going to talk about how to be interviewed, tips for being interviewed, talking to reporters, how to talk to journalists, that kind of thing. That is going to be in 2 weeks, and Karen will have more information on that. So we're going to talk about how to fit your story into a format for public facing audiences for strategic communication, and how to use communication to advance the group's goals. What we're not going to talk about, this is not a how-to for social media. So I know many of the messaging tools and practices that we talk about today will be applicable for social media. You can translate that knowledge to how you use social media, but we're not going to do like brass tacks, how to tweet, how to use Facebook, that kind of thing. This is also not going to be a specific medical advocacy or medical communication training. I know that a lot of what you all are dealing with are difficulties and challenges around talking to medical professionals. That is its own thing, and we are not going to talk about that today. But we are going to talk about how to use communication for public-facing audiences. So this is our this is sort of our flow for today. As I said, 40 minutes, and then we'll get to Q&A. Okay, so I want to start just by talking about what is this approach? What is strategic communication, and how should we think about this coming into this new sort of space? Okay, so what does successful strategic communication look like? It's different from regular conversation. It's different from, communication in a lot of other ways. What does it look like? First and foremost, it's centered around a few main messages. We're going to talk about main messages a lot. This is a specific tool that you're going to come back to. And so thinking about what those main messages are, what you want to communicate is a key part of that. Second, it's goal oriented. Because this issue is so complicated and the group has a lot of different goals, there's going to be a temptation to try and get them all in at once, to accomplish everything in one interaction. But when you try and do too much, it can really cancel itself out. And in this kind of environment where there's so much going on, being disciplined about which goal you're trying to accomplish is going to help you be heard. Next, it's audience targeted. So what does that mean? It keeps in mind the stakeholder that you're talking to and factors that into how you communicate. And there are going to be multiple different stakeholders, different audiences that the COVID-19 Long Hauler Advocacy Project is talking to. And we're going to have to choose the one or maybe two, but likely one that we're targeting in each strategic communication. One, it's precise and concise. So this is just, the sort of vehicle for how to do it. It's a tool as part of a broader strategy. So if you think about the toolbox that you all are working with to try to advance the group's goals, strategic communication is one of them. And it's also, in terms of language, is simple and it uses non-technical terms and plain speak. And I want to just take a moment here. I know that for a lot of folks who are trying to make themselves heard and make themselves understood in particularly a medical context, that's an environment that really benefits from you sort of advancing the way that you talk, adopting that expert language, adopting that medical language, and that is a way that you make yourself heard. In strategic communication, this actually has the opposite effect, because we're trying to make people hear us and connect with us so that we can motivate them to take a next action. And so it might sound counterintuitive, but actually when you're doing strategic communication, the more plain language, the more non-technical terms that you can use, the better. So just really quickly, there are some differences in conversation versus communication. So in personal conversations, when you're talking to a friend, a family member, you're trying to be directly responsive to what the other person just said. You're giving the fullest extent of the information as you know it to be true, and each participant is sharing equal space. But in strategic communication, your purpose there is to advance a goal. And you continue to emphasize main messages, even if it might not be as directly responsive to what the other person just said. And you also can be really selective about what you share rather than sharing the fullest extent of the information. So what are the goals of public education? And we're starting here because public education is going to be step one of any strategic communication that this group does. Most people, and these are actually listed in order of the way that they build on each other. So we start with one really intentionally. The first goal of public education is to change knowledge. Most people you're speaking to aren't aware of the problem, and reiterating the basic facts in every communication is really important. We hear that it might take as many as 17 messages, the research shows, to make someone really understand something. And as you all know, this is going to be a new topic to a lot of people, even well-intentioned people that are coming to this with an open mind. They might not know the facts that you're talking about. And so reiterating the basic facts of what long COVID is, what the impact is, that's going to be really important in every communication. The second goal, building on that, is to dispel myths and misconceptions about the problem and shift sentiments and norms. So part of the public education is to make people think differently about the problem. That could mean that they understand for the first time that the consequences of COVID don't just, we need to expand beyond hospitalization. We need to expand to understand long COVID. It could mean that the sentiment that that when they're thinking about the impact or the harm of the virus, that they start to understand long COVID. And social norms could be something as simple as every time people talk about long COVID, or sorry, about COVID itself, they start to include long COVID. And third, and this can only happen once you've achieved 1 and 2, is to change behaviors. So we want to advocate for desired behavior support and resources. So when we're talking to lawmakers and asking them to allocate more funding, when we're talking to media and asking them to increase their reporting of long COVID, that one can only happen once they understand the problem and that attitude change has occurred. Okay, so now we're going into some of the more tactical understanding of what messaging looks like. And messaging is just how we use language to accomplish our strategic communication goals. So a main message, this is a tool called the message triangle. A main message has these 3 components. Contained within the key message, you will hear the person identify the problem, they'll present the solution to the problem, and they'll give you a vision for what it could look like for that problem to be solved. And the reason that the key message contains all of those is because it then gives you the opportunity to drill down further into one of these 3. Maybe with lawmakers, you're drilling down into the solution because their role is to play part of that problem solver, to give more funding, to designate CDC guidelines. When you're building community with other people with chronic illness and disability, you might want to drill down further on the vision where we all can experience, what we need. And if you're talking to media, you might want to it gives you the opportunity to drill down further on the problem because the problems might be what they're reporting on. Here is one example. And I chose this example because it's part of the advocacy. It comes from the advocacy world. I used to work in legal advocacy. And so this is an example we used. So the problem that we were identifying, trans people can still be fired from their jobs, turned away from housing or public space for their gender identity. The solution that we were advocating in this specific instance, there are a lot of solutions, but the main message that we're advocating here was about this solution. We need to pass the Equality Act so that there are explicit, consistent federal protections. The vision of what it would look like for that problem to be solved is transgender people deserve to be able to move freely in public spaces and their lives without discrimination. And so putting all 3 of those together, the key message is trans people are constitutionally protected against sex discrimination, and our laws should reflect that. And you can see that it doesn't explicitly say all 3, but it creates a framework that you can go back to all 3 of them when you need to. We're going to come back to this later in the context of long COVID, and we're going to talk through how to create a main message for this group. Okay. Next, I want to turn to storytelling because that is the main vehicle that you all will be using to do your strategic communication. You are all storytellers. And so I wanted to start quickly, or I wanted to stop here quickly to talk about why storytelling is important and how we can use it in this framework. So why is it important? Because there's actually neurobiological research that shows the effectiveness of stories. We understand and remember information better when it's accompanied by a story, number one. Stories are actually a memory tool. They help us recall the information better. Number two, our brains can't conceive of the suffering of millions, but one person's story helps us to understand problem at a human scale. And that's not just for COVID, that's for something like poverty, that's for something like economic inequality, global, development. We literally cannot wrap our brains around these big numbers and that scale, but one story we can understand, and that gives us a way in. And the third, storytelling is connective. It helps us connect with others, which is an important first step before attitudes and behaviors can be changed. So there's research that shows the parts of the brain that light up when people hear a story, and it brings us in and it makes us feel closer to the problem in a way that's going to allow us to change our attitudes and be motivated to change our behavior. So storytelling in this context, and I want to say, as someone who has worked with people who've experienced trauma and are using that trauma to do advocacy, whether it's different kinds of survivors or any, legal advocacy, funding, whatever, this gives you a roadmap for how to tell your story in a way that's not going to re-traumatize you, that's not going to trigger you while you're telling it, and also puts it in a container that people can understand for strategic communication, for advocacy purposes. So these are just some tools for how to tell your story in a way that's going to both accomplish the goals, but also not trigger you in the process. So one, sharing your story in your own words. You should be comfortable telling it in your own voice. You don't have to adopt someone else's vocabulary. And this, again, goes to the place where we can talk in plain language. If the medical language, you don't have to adopt it here. This is about you, and you don't need to change who you are for the purposes of communicating about the issue. Know that you're not being repetitive, you're being consistent. You're going to have to repeat yourself again and say these main messages multiple times, and just know that that's okay. And in fact, it's necessary. Three, using full sentences and building a narrative. So to the extent that you can take people through that beginning, middle, and end, and really help them understand the arc of the story, that is going to feed into that research that we know about how we understand, because our brains are wired to understand that narrative format. And number four, think about what you want people to hear and feel when seeing or reading your story, and try to make that the focus. So if what you want to drive home is that you are no longer able to work, and you want them to think about that loss of your professional identity and what that means, make that a focal point of your story. If you want people to understand the way that the medical establishment has ignored or minimized long COVID, make that the focus of your story. So you're not, again, we're being really goal oriented around how we're communicating, and that goes to the level of your own story. Okay, so messaging in practice, and I actually got through this a little faster than I thought I would, so we'll have more time for questions. So what does this look like for this group? Okay. Now, I want to say that I'm pulling this together. This is a first draft. It's a first pass. This is not set in stone. This is just a suggestion for the purposes of this training. And we are, and you all should feel free to, and I encourage you to make it your own and to play with this. So this is a suggestion. This is not prescriptive in this language. Okay, so these goals I actually pulled from your website, and I put them in the context of strategic communication, reworded them slightly. So your goals are to educate the public on long COVID and elevate it in our thinking about the virus, 2, to catalyze government action to address long COVID. 3, to drive new and additional medical research. 4, collaborate and build community with the disability and chronic illness communities. And 5, to support long haulers. So these are the goals that you're going to be thinking about when you create those messages, when you talk about that storytelling. These are the ones to keep in mind. And I know, and again, I want to repeat, there's going to be a temptation to try and address all of these at once. But if you think about the fact that, you know, when you're, for instance, trying to make a parent of a school-aged child understand that long COVID is a risk, in addition to hospitalization, you're not going to focus on increased government funding. When you're trying to talk about, talk to media about elevating the need for including long COVID in their storytelling, you're not necessarily going to talk about funding needed for the research, right? So thinking about being really specific about what goals you want to accomplish. So who are your audiences or your stakeholders? These are the people that your strategic communication talks to. And again, picking one of these, maximum 2 of these, is going to be critical to making sure that your communication and your messages are focused and help break through. Talking to everyone is the same as talking to no one. That's something that we say a lot. And so being clear about which audience you're focusing on. So what are they? Government on the federal and the state level, and the agencies in charge of directing funding, to media, to include long COVID and reporting. There's a lot of times where in this work, the media is a tool, it's a vehicle for delivering your message to the audiences. But I think here the media is one of your audiences because you want to increase the ways that they're talking about long COVID. 3, the medical community, allocate and direct their research. And this again is different than talking to your own doctors, right? Strategic communication for the medical community is different than talking to your own doctors. Just want to say that again. And 4, concerned and sympathetic public and allies. Unfortunately, as we all know, COVID has been politicized, and there is a sector of the public that is not concerned and not sympathetic. Those are not the people we're trying to get on our side. The people who are already predisposed to care about this, but who might not have the information to be so, those are the people we're trying to get. Okay, so once again, we have our message triangle, we have our problem, our solution, and our vision, and those 3 components make up our key message. So this is one suggestion, and it is, again, one message. It's not every key message, but it is one example. So what is a problem? And we just picked one and then identified the solution and the vision and then the key message for that one problem. But we could put any number of problems in this box. But for the purposes of this exercise, what is the one problem that we picked? Long COVID and long haulers aren't just included in the discussion of the impact of COVID. So what is the solution to that? That media and policymakers shift their priorities to include long COVID, right? We know that they're talking about hospitalizations and case counts, not as much about long COVID. So the solution would be that they shift that. What is a vision that what would it look like for this problem to be solved? That long COVID is integrated into media and policy approaches to the impact of the pandemic. That every piece of reporting, that every speech that a politician gives, that every grant proposal includes long COVID. Okay, so what is a key message that's going to put all 3 of these together? Here it is. In order for us sorry, there's a typo here. In order for us to understand the true impact of the pandemic, our national conversation must include long COVID and the widespread consequences it has for individuals and communities. You can see that that is very high level, that's very general, and it allows you to drill down, if needed, on the problem, the solution, and the vision. So again, this is one example, and this is not prescriptive, this is not set in stone. This is just an offering of what this could look like. Okay, so now I'm going to open it up for Q&A. And I'm going to go back to the Zoom. That is okay. And I'm going to leave actually going to stop sharing my screen just for the moment. Oh no, I can just open up the chat. Okay, great. Okay. So, sorry, 1 second, just a little bit of Zoom logistics here. Here we go. Okay. So, unfortunately, not sure how to enable closed captioning. But we can, we're going to send out the recording, and you're also going to get these slides. Yes, the replay will be available. Okay, I'm scooting up to the top here, and I'm just going to look. How do we deal with scope creep for media interviews? Social security for long COVID, quality of life for single mothers. That is in media interview tactics. We are going to talk about that in the next section, in the next presentation. That session will be on the 27th. Thank you, Karen. Okay. Scrolling down. Again, being interviewed by the media, we're going to talk about how to translate these principles into being interviewed by the media in the next session. Okay. Do we have any advice for writing op-eds about personal experiences with long COVID? I will send Karen some resources for how to write an op-ed. Many of the same main message principles apply, but I'll send some stuff to Karen so she can share. I'm just scrolling through here. In terms of telling your story, I think what you're meaning is we need to craft it each time with a different focus depending on the audience. So we don't just list out all of our doctor's appointments, we craft a key message. Is that right? Yes, that's exactly right. So for something like, talking about a if you're trying to impress upon, let's say, someone, sorry, let me take a step back. So when is listing out the doctor's appointments going to be helpful? If that's part of your story, then that's part of your story. But I think we're talking about tailoring it to specific people. And again, it's going back to what do you want someone to take away from hearing your story? So if a situation where it might be useful to talk about the different doctor's appointments is if you want someone to take away the ways that the medical establishment or doctors aren't, they're behind on long COVID, they're not being receptive to long COVID or long haulers. But for instance, if you're talking about the need for government funding, right? If what you want people to take away from is, wow, we don't have enough government resources dedicated to this, might not be necessary. In fact, I would say probably not necessary to list out like your doctor's appointments. How do we focus on when we have significant cognitive impairment? So we're going to get into tips for being interviewed by media, in the next session, as I said. But I think in general, notes, writing it out when you can, having notes. There is nothing that says that you need to do this all from memory. Okay, scrolling down to the next question. As a caregiver, how do I know what not to say? Alexis, do you mind dropping some more in the chat or unmuting yourself and sharing a little bit more about that question? I'm very hesitant in dealing with the media due to all the unsupportive people, especially the negative. Oh, go ahead, Alexis, whenever you're ready.
Hi everyone, this is
Hi.
Mia's sister. I'm one of the long haulers since March 2020. Just to help, I'm just gonna jump in and facilitate. So Mia, I will read a question to you and keep track
Okay.
of them.
Thank you.
I want
Hold
to
on, Becca. We're just gonna let Alexis.
yeah, I just want to say that and then Alexis, go for it.
Hi. So thank you for doing this, first of all. My husband, Mike, has been a long hauler since May of 2020. And when I talk to people about what's been going on with him and with us, um, it's very hard for me not to go on a rant because I'm really upset that, first of all, the government was giving us pandemic unemployment assistance and then just stopped. And now we have nothing but my Social Security disability. And things like that. And it's extremely hard for me to just sort of like put it in a conversation without getting very upset. And even when talking with friends and family, even on like social media, is the hardest because I don't know if there's anything that I really should not say. And I try to be very open, for better or worse. I'm just like that all the time. I tend to overshare. um so when I'm telling our story, I really do tell it, and I just want to make sure I don't scare people off from the cause, you know instead of pulling them in.
Absolutely. So I think there are a few things here. One is when we're talking to family and friends, that is not strategic communication. And I think that it's
It
really
depends who
important.
your family and friends are.
Fair enough. But for the principles of this, like I said at the beginning, strategic communication is goal oriented, right? So if there is a specific goal you have with talking to family or friends, or to the different audiences you're talking to, it's really coming back to that. It's going to it's what do you want, number one, what do you want people to take away from? And then going back to our slide here, one second, and I'm just gonna start sharing my screen again. So we're coming back to this slide. We're coming back to where are they in this trajectory? So some people may not know what you're talking about. And for them, it's talking about the basic facts and explaining it. Two, do they understand the basic facts, but there are maybe some misconceptions or myths that you're trying to dispel, or you're trying to change their attitudes? Or are you trying to get them at number three? And I think the biggest thing is it sounds like you're trying to start changing attitudes before changing knowledge, right? So trying to get someone to believe that this is important, to believe that this is something that needs more attention or to take it seriously, is literally not going to happen until they have that knowledge, until they understand what this is and what this really looks like. So I think that, like, when you're talking to people, if you're hearing resistance, what you're hearing is, I don't understand this. And again, going to the challenging place of this has been politicized. There is people are, when they hear something new information, they might hear you saying, let me share new information with you, as like a criticism of the fact that they didn't know it, right? So the really important phrase here, and I'll put this in our notes, is this is actually new information that you may not have, or actually we're all just learning about this. And so you may not have heard about this before. There's like a psychological thing of saying this is new information that gives people permission to hear it, and then you deliver the information. And in terms of what, being angry, that is true. Like if you listen to any advocate, to any survivor of any trauma talking about experience, they are angry. I mean, if you listen to, like, just as an example, because we're in Black History Month, like if you listen to Black Lives Matter activists talk about police killings, they don't get rid of their anger. They sound angry, but the anger is sort of the context. That the anger doesn't, it's not instead, like all of these things can exist alongside the anger, right? You can present the problem, the solution, the vision, you can give the key message, you can give them new information, and you can do that while angry. And I think that sort of that, we're not talking about like taking all the emotion out of it just because it's strategic or follows a certain template. The other thing you can do is say, this is really emotional. And so like, I just want, like, this has been, a year, 2 years of our lives. This is really hard. So I'm going to say this, but you're going to hear some emotion in my voice. And like, that is part of being who you are when, going to the storytelling place of like being authentic to you. Okay, I'm going to scoot to our next question.
So I will, yeah. So I'm just going to feed you the next question. The next one I want to just go back to, since we missed it before, is Dana's question. I'm actually going to take the second part of this before you take the first part, Mia. Dana's question was, how can we change the media just talking about long COVID as it's brain fog? Most people say, oh, I have brain fog as well. What other word can we use instead of brain fog? So Karen can fact check me on this, or just, corroborate this. Brain fog right now is a non-scientific term for the neurocognitive deficits associated with long COVID. Right now, there's no other concrete medical term that doctors are using instead of brain fog. Part of the reason for this is that it's not something that's easy to test and to diagnose. It's a clinical diagnosis, which means it comes from symptoms. The other thing is that brain fog due to COVID can come from a lot of the different conditions that are associated with COVID. So it could be due to ME/CFS, which is myalgic encephalomyelitis, or chronic fatigue syndrome. It can be used due to if you have kidney dysfunction or liver dysfunction and toxins build up in your bloodstream, that will start to affect brain functions. So you can say there are specific neurocognitive deficits, or there are a lot of neurological consequences. Yeah, dysautonomia as well. When your autonomic nervous system is not working the way that it's supposed to, it's going to lead to Casey's example, or to Casey's point of giving examples, you can say COVID leads to a lot of neurocognitive or neurological and cognitive deficits, including confusion, deficits in working memory, difficulty with word recall, difficulty with executive function, stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm going to
what it
totally
is.
Yeah, Becca, that's it. I'm going to jump in and pick up here. Thank you for that. So going back to our place about using non-technical language, that is what I would do. I would explain it. I would say, one of the experiences of long COVID is something that we're calling brain fog. Here's what that looks like. Memory issues, attention issues. There's a lot, like, it's not just a little bit of forgetfulness. It's akin to dementia. I mean, like, going to using words that people already understand. My sister is a psychology clinician and a social worker, and I love her. Neurocognitive is not a word that people understand. So you can say neurological and cognitive, but I would say issues, and I apologize, I'm in Washington, D.C., and these sirens are insane. I would explain it. So one of the main issues of brain fog is one of the main symptoms rather is brain fog. It means that you can't focus. It means that your nervous system is completely out of whack. It means that your blood pressure is going up and down. It means that you can't focus or think. And I would also be really clear about the differences, right? So before, I used to be able to participate in a 2-hour meeting, and now I can't do that without a raging headache. Or I used to be able to, go to the grocery store without a grocery list. And now, if I don't have a list in front of me, I cannot remember what I was there for. If I don't have a list of errands, I'm not going to remember where to go. Like, I would explain it. Because the other thing too is that, like, listing symptoms, listing impacts it's not like, it doesn't help people connect, right? We're talking about storytelling as like connective. So when you tell a story about what your symptoms look like and how they've changed your life, that's something that people can enter into. That's something that someone who has never experienced this can say, like, oh, wow, like I can see myself in that situation.
Can I jump in real quick, like 2
Please.
seconds? So I think this is a really good like segue midway conversation from what we're doing today and what we're doing next week, because just like Mia was pointing out, where we may need to have like a bullet point list of what to review, there is no shame in the game if you have to make a bullet point list before your media conversations and letting the reporter know that you have some brain fog issues and you suffer from fatigue, because some reporters will talk to you for an hour or two if you let them. If you're somebody who suffers from like post-exertional malaise or crashes very easily, let them know that you have 15-20 minutes max of their time so that they know what the important things are that they need to get across to you, and save your energy. And I know for me, one of the most frustrating things is losing your thought in the middle of saying it. And I've had a lot of people come to me saying that they're hesitant to speak to reporters because of how they'll be portrayed or how they'll be seen, and they feel like they need to be like top level professional, when our job is really to be the patient, but be a patient educator. It is important sometimes for them to see us going through some of these experiences. And I don't think it's anything that any of us should have to be ashamed of or hide. So I want to flag for you, like, make a list of what you want to discuss. Let the reporter know in advance of any limitations that you have, and think through the things that you want to say. Even if it takes you a couple of days to put a really solid list of 5 things together, don't jam pack yourself with 20 minutes before the appointment, before the interview, and then you're taxed out during the interview. So just keep some of these things in mind, that you can decline invitations to speak. You can choose what you participate in. You can set limitations for yourself to keep your best, your health at best that you can. So just to throw that out there, because I thought that was a really great middle ground for what we're doing today versus on the 27th.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen. Okay, I have the next question as would appreciate any tips on zooming out to connect your personal story to a broader narrative. For instance, connecting long COVID to the broader conversations around labor shortage, paid leave, etc. Great question. So again, this goes to what you're emphasizing in what you want people to take away from your story. And so I think it makes sense for this question, have different versions of your story. Like, this doesn't have to be one script that you repeat over and over again. And in fact, in professional communication, I will have 4 different sets of almost exactly the same, but slightly different talking points for different audiences and needs. So for something like this, if you want to emphasize conversations around the labor shortage, paid leave, then you can talk about, instead of emphasizing in your storytelling your reception from doctors, then you want to emphasize the way that you haven't been able to work. Like, think about what are the parts of your story that you're pulling out and shining a spotlight on. So it could be the way that you work, or if you're a caretaker, the additional hours that you have to take out of your work life and your work day to take care of your loved one. And then it goes to your key messages, right? So a key message for that one, the problem is we have no, paid leave in this country. And a solution would be like, the problem is that we have no paid leave in this country, and COVID has created thousands, if not millions more people who need sick leave. The solution would be to give paid leave to everyone and to caregivers. And the vision is that everyone, is able to work in a way that is receptive to their lives and their needs and things that come up in their family and with their health. And then the key message for putting all three of those together is we need a national paid, or we need a state, insert state here, we need a New York paid leave policy, because there are thousands more people in our state that need their work to be receptive to them and the needs of their loved ones that they're caregiving for. So that's like the paid leave one. The labor shortage one, companies are struggling to hire people after the pandemic, and now there are thousands more people who can't work, who maybe would have before. The solution is that we are creating a flexible work environment so that people can be accommodated in the needs that they have. The vision is that someone, regardless of disability or illness, is able to work and contribute to their profession in the way that they hope to. And the key message is, if we're concerned about the labor shortage, then we should be making sure that there is accommodations for people in the workplace with long COVID, right? So putting all three of these together. So I think the story is your way in. It's not all that you're saying. You need the main messages alongside the story. So think about them like as partners. What do you highlight in your story to go along with what your main messages focus on? Okay. Rebecca, is there another question?
Let me see. So far it's just comments. Mike, yes, Mike earlier had said that he has a video PSA idea to storytell. I would like to discuss it if it sounds good.
That sounds like a great follow-up with Karen.
Hi, class. Well, but I also want to make sure that I'm studying correctly, teacher. So to change knowledge, right?
Yeah.
So my idea in storytelling is, so like I take 60-second PSA theory, that being like, we come up on Karen before, and she's talking about who she is, and then we go to Karen now. I've had long COVID for 2 years, whatever, and blah, 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 and go to a different person. So maybe actual somebody in the public that we know. And I'm in the media too. And then you go, yeah, this is me. This is my life. Dip to black. Okay, this is me now. Long COVID for the last 14 months. I spent February of 2021 in the yard picking weeds because it's the only thing I could do. That's my idea for the type of like changing knowledge. And if I am feeling better, like I think I am, I can also work on these types of things now.
Thanks, Mike. I'm not sure if you've seen any of them yet, but up on our website, we have several slideshows that are depicting people's experiences with long COVID and what advocacy means to them. They're not as detailed as what you were describing, but it's something we can definitely think about moving forward. So thank you for that.
Without you, yeah. Cool.
Mia, real quick.
Yeah.
Somebody had asked earlier in the chat and we didn't get to it, and I definitely think it's a good thing that we need to discuss. And they asked, how do we contact media? Should we contact media? So do you have any advice on tips on how people locate local media, national media, and so on and so forth?
Yeah. So how and should are two different things. I think should, I'll start there. I think it's good to discuss with Karen and the other members of the steering committee. before you do that, to make sure that it's advancing the goals. So for instance, if there's a paid leave bill in your state, then talking to media about that paid leave bill is a really important one. You know, if you found someone that wrote a personal essay and they're a journalist and you think there's someone who could like do a longer deep dive into long COVID, I would check in with Anne, with Karen, to see if they've already been contacted them. So I like the should I'm going to leave on strategy to Karen and Anne and the rest of the board, because you know, the last thing I want to do is like give you all free rein to reach out to a lot of reporters, and there's nothing that reporters hate more than like hearing from multiple people about the same thing. So, you know, in my mind, a spreadsheet with like who's contacted them, like their name, who's contacted them, and like next steps would be the best thing to share. How is a lot easier. Find people who are writing things that are relevant to the issue. Whether it might be long COVID, it might not be. So it might be something else about disability or chronic illness. So find people that are, you know, read a lot, and find things that people who are writing things that you think would be good. Like, oh, this person gets it. It would be great if we talk to them. Or, oh, like, you know, that kind of thing. And then for local media, your local news will have a website with a contact form. I think that's like a great way to start. You know, websites with, you know, every like local TV station will have a website, local news. They'll have an email address. Journalists live on Twitter. So chances are, if you find a journalist, if you find an article, or there's like a TV anchor or someone in your area, chances are they're on Twitter. So I would go find them. A lot of times their email will be listed in their Twitter. If not, there's direct messages might be open. You can send them a direct message. And also Karen and Anne have a list they have a media list of reporters. And so if there's someone that you with email addresses, and so if there's both for national reporters who are most of the time located in DC, New York, LA, maybe a few other places, along with a bunch of different local areas. So first stop would be to check with them, see if they have an email address. And then the next would be look for a website, look for a Twitter account. The other thing you can do is just like, if you really can't find one, find someone else who works at that same outlet and guess their email protocol. So if it's, you know, at NY, like it's, I know for like the Washington Post, it's like first name dot last name at washpost.com. So once you know that, you can guess what other people's are, even if you can't find the email address. We have about 6 minutes left. Are there any other questions on messaging, on storytelling? Again, we're going to have on the 27th a part 2 of this training that dives into being interviewed, talking to reporters, those specifics.
I wanted to flag Teresa's question earlier. We kind of touched on this, but not in its entirety, which was I'm very hesitant about dealing with the media due to all the unsupportive people against long COVID, especially in the medical community. I don't want to be seen as negative.
Okay, so again, I think it's being really clear that we're not going to convince people who are predisposed to be against caring. People who don't believe that COVID is real, who don't believe in, and we all know who those people are. Not going to convince them, not going to try to convince them. And I say that because, like, they're also a minority of people, and it's a bigger population. There are more people who care and don't know than people who actively are against it. So that avoiding them, and not avoiding because you're scared, but you're making a strategic choice to not try and persuade them, also means avoiding the media that they exclusively use. So Breitbart, Fox News, Daily Caller. There are a bunch more. If it's like extreme right-wing media, don't do it. Just leave it. If it's yeah.
I would also add in, if they're approaching you, giving you the names of any potential researchers or providers participating in the thing as well. Also look into some of the things that they've done, because there have been a lot of researchers lately that have been putting things out about long COVID being psychosomatic and anxiety driven. One of these was recently from an organization in Canada. So don't be afraid to ask your reporter or the journalist questions back. Who's involved in this story? Because maybe you don't want to participate with a certain group, a certain researcher, a certain medical facility, so on and so forth. So don't be afraid to ask questions back. Sorry, I just want to.
That's exactly right. And that gets into something we'll discuss a lot next time, which is you owe reporters nothing. You have not signed, just because they pick up the phone or they email you or they DM you on Twitter, you are not obligated to anything. You get to ask as many questions as you want and before you commit to anything. And we'll get into that, but to Karen's point, like, you get to ask beforehand. So how to avoid people who aren't going to be unsupportive is to look at like mainstream outlets, right? Like the networks, the big networks that we think of, NBC, ABC, CBS, CNN, your local newspaper, like, the Arizona Republic is not going to be anti. There might be, and this is another point that I'll make, Googling the person when they reach out to you, there's a difference between the news side and the opinion side. The news side is going to report the news. The opinion side is going to write their own opinion. And the opinion side is the one that you need to worry about more, because they're not beholden to reporting the news in the same objective way. So and we'll talk about what these titles are, so you don't have to guess. That's why we have a whole other training for this, because there's a lot of detail here that I know you all are looking for. So if it's a mainstream outlet, and they're on the news side, you're going to be okay. And especially if it's like something that's focused on like people with disabilities, people with chronic illness, you're going to be okay. I think that the vast majority of people that you're going to encounter when you're doing this are people who don't have that knowledge. And that's why we start with change knowledge before change attitudes. We have 1 minute left. So I don't want to take up any more of your time. Karen, as Karen said, you can put questions to her. Our next session is going to be on the 27th. And thank you all for having me. I'm going to turn it back to Karen.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I hope that this was helpful. I think next week we'll be getting more into the nitty gritty of it. I think a lot of the questions that you guys wrote in had a lot more to do with actual face-to-face, or not face-to-face, but you know what I mean, contact with the media. So if you think of any questions that you had today or questions that you'll have for next session that you maybe didn't put on the registration form for us to look through, just send them to me at contact@longhauler-advocacy.org. Right now, really what we have going on is the open letter. I put all of the links in the chat earlier for our open letter. We just sent a second letter as a follow-up out to all the same people. I attached our action guide. You can ignore the dates that are on that, but there is contact lists on there for media, contact lists for governors, senators, local officials, all of that you can copy and paste emails to all of them, find them on social media, share our social media open letter stuff with them. But everything is laid out on what I said. So if you didn't grab those links, please do so. I'll leave that up for like another minute or two if people haven't grabbed them from the chat. And let me see if I actually still have this copied and pasted. There you go. So again, I hope this was helpful. And again, don't be shy to reach out. I did put in the chat. I've been, very available to our members. You can find me in Messenger, on Twitter, via email. I probably receive anywhere from 10 to 15 requests a week from members asking for some type of media help or guidance or help reaching out to doctors. So don't be hesitant to reach out if you're able and willing. We would love to have you as a resource to help when we get these requests and so on and so forth. And thank you to Mia, thank you to Becca, and here I think we have Anne and Stephanie as our board members. Lisa couldn't join us today. So yeah, we're heading in the right direction. I love that we can bring this resource to you guys, and we look forward to seeing you on the 27th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.